Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on weird and true mysterious stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Would you like even more content? Here's my Patreon. Now onto the stories. Case file number 1134, written by Exterminator267, the Seagull that refused physics. When I was a kid, my cousin and I went island hopping in Maine. We still do. Well, one day, we were walking around this small island we beached the boat at. It was a quiet day, no breeze whatsoever out in the middle of the water. This island had no trees either, so nothing was blocking a breeze. There simply was none. All of a sudden, we heard squawking. Manic squawking. There were two seagulls, one flapping its wings and flying circles around the other. The other, you ask, was standing, wings folded at rest, about 75 feet in the air, completely still. As soon as I shouted for my cousin, the still bird dropped out of the sky and we heard an audible crack as its head and neck broke, blood decorating the rocks. The flying seagull landed next to his or her fallen. I had never felt so sad and confused in all my life. There is no possible way in the laws of physics that we know that would allow for that bird to remain motionless 75 feet in the air with its wings folded. Case notes for file 1134, the seagull that refused physics. Yep, this seems to occur frequently with any flying object or bird. As you say, folded wings. The seagull had almost certainly already passed away by then. It was already dead, in the air. But it took the universe simulation time to compute this fact. I think most animals are sentient. But I also think that the universe is capable of simulating animals as placeholders, decorative if you will. This is what's happened here, in my opinion. The program failed to load the full parameters for a few seconds. You weren't supposed to see that. Maybe you weren't supposed to look up there at that given moment. There could be advanced algorithms built into the simulation to predict what our choices will be, but in any given moment, these choices are not fully deterministic because we do have an element of free will. Influenced, but still able to break through what is predicted. So in those cases, you get errors like this, things you're not supposed to see. Ordinarily, you would have just seen a bird collapse, a seagull collapse. It would be odd, but not that odd, it does happen. Case file number 1135, written by 4RS Mitt, my vanishing savior. This has been nagging me for decades. When I was 7, I went skiing with my younger brother. It had snowed, there was a suitable hill nearby. I remember the wooden skis, etc. After some time I had to pee. There were a lot of kids about and adults too, out strolling for their Sunday afternoon walk. Germans did do that. So no ducking in the bushes, and all the winter gear I had on was in the way, so I had to go home. A shortcut, think hypotenuse of a right triangle, across the field was the quickest way. Except for the deep ditch where it intersected with the road. I tried stepping up the ditch and kept sliding back down. My skis didn't have good edges. I started crying, being frustrated and having to pee. I didn't even think of taking the skis off. Suddenly, I get lifted out of the ditch, set on the snowy road, and I can still see the worsted wool overcoat and sleeve of the man that did that. I can even smell the damp wool, as I was held against him during the lift. I wiped my nose and eyes, collected my poles, and turned to thank my savior, and he's gone. There are people, but nobody wears a coat like that. No tall men. Not one way, not the other. I had a clear view for a minimum of 100 meters, 330 feet, either way, and the guy was not running. And I was polite, so I didn't wait long to say thank you. I have been back there many times, and even measured out the distance on Google Maps. There is simply no way I could have not seen the person who lifted me out of the ditch. I have literally spent time timing people walking there. It takes most minutes to walk that corner, yet my rescuer was gone in a few seconds. Case notes for file 1135, my vanishing savior. Not only is it physically impossible for your description of the environment to have escaped away that fast, especially in a snowy environment. It's not like he could just run full speed on a flat, perfectly paved road. It would be slippery, snowy. But also, you were 7. No adult I know would just save a 7-year-old and then not at least confirm the child was okay, knew who his parents were, and etc. Even, a decade or two ago, after saving them. So yes, I think this was a force that saved you, Perhaps indeed a guardian angel sent from above, not your time. Even within the multiverse concept, there may be reasons why a soul needs to be tethered to one particular universe. It was a concept I keep thinking about. Because of the multiverse and quantum immortality, death doesn't seem to really matter. And I mean, that's good in a certain sense, it's not permanent, at least in the way we perceive it normally. But also, why save anyone then? Because they'll just switch to a different universe if that's the case. So there must be particular reasoning for someone to be in any given universe. And more to it than just that. Bonus file, written by AlexRuzhyo, The Dark Side of Steel. I lived in a dead steel town. Buildings were put up somewhat haphazardly. If you imagine your typical suburban block, imagine instead of a backyard, you had another house or two. It was kinda cramped. My mom, grandma, brothers, and I lived in the 2-story duplex at the front of the property. It's more or less a traditional house, unlike the building on the back of the property. That one was 3 stories tall and is basically a large above-ground basement and shed with 2 stories of apartments on top. The buildings were maybe 15 feet apart from one another. Anyways, my uncle rented the middle apartment for a few years, sold substances from it, got addicted, fell out of a stable relationship into one with another addict, went from being reasonably well off to losing the grip on his life. He ended up moving in with us after the city had to cut off water to the back for some infrastructure issue, and my grandma had them cut the power as well. My mom, bros, and I moved out shortly after she married, but he returned a couple years later after it fell apart. About 2 months into living there again, I'm up late and I smell a bit of smoke, which is normal. My uncle was always up late, usually high, doing something in the kitchen. Turns out this time, he passed out with grease on the stove. We didn't know that at the time, but as soon as I got up to check on the smell, my grandma screamed for everyone to get out of the house. We didn't know where he was, but the fire stopped us from getting to his room. A couple cops showed up after I tried hooking up a hose from the shed to a spigot, which was unfortunately tied to the back house's now defunct water line. I suggested breaking the window to his room, but the cops said that air might fuel the fire, and it was best to leave it alone. We tried banging on it and shouting for my uncle, but didn't know he was already gone at that point. Out of ideas, I woke up my friend from across the street and we watched from his porch as the fire trucks arrived. My uncle died. He was alive when they found him, but he died later at the hospital due to smoke inhalation. Even had he survived, this particular dose was pretty bad, and he would most likely have suffered some permanent issues from it. Anyways, the house was well enough off to be gutted and refitted. It was about a year later that my mother, I forget what she was doing, noticed that there was a light on in my uncle's old apartment. Given his history, we assumed it was some kid or his old unsavory friend squatting or lighting up. We call the cops, and the same initial responders from the fire show up. They cautiously go up the stairs, peek in the windows, knock, and shout without a sign from anyone. Sure enough, no one's there. They tell my grandma and mom, who are still confused about the source of the light. The power's been cut for a couple years after all. We go up there with the cops and find that the ceiling light in the living room is on, which doesn't make sense. We flick the switch and nothing happens. My grandma and mom start to freak out, which unsettles the cops, especially the one that had a few run-ins with my uncle. We leave and watch the apartment for a couple more hours until the light is cut out on its own. Didn't fade, just turned off. Case notes for the bonus file, The Dark Side of Steel. I'm terribly sorry for your whole situation here. It's rough on people. They turn to any crutch they can in desperate times. I'm lucky in that while I grew up poor, I had love for my parents and the crutch was just gaming and eating food, but still being active so I never got fat. Lucky me. When I was homeless actually much later on, just like 18 or 19 in Florida, I had such a good base of love to fall on that no matter how hard the physical times got, I only focused on the silver linings. I was still kinda happy, weirdly enough, baking in the Florida sun. I remember sleeping on Cocoa Beach in Florida, like a week after I got there. The first time I overslept, the sun fried me alive, so bad that my skin peeled off a few days later, like a snake shedding its outer layer. It was wild. I was actually in a hotel at that time, even though I had no money, because There was the manager of the hotel that saw me in the parking lot. I was just, waiting there in the shade of it was a above ground parking lot with multiple layers, so there was shade. Anyways, he saw me, offered me a room for the night, which was very kind of him. And my skin was peeling off in the shower. It was just, I was still happy, and I think the main reason why is I knew the future would be better. I knew I wouldn't be like that forever. And I think that's it. It's both the foundation of love, but also what really enables someone to endure hardship is genuine hope and belief that the future will be better. What I do wonder in this case, was it your uncle still living in that old house, as a spirit, a fragment of him, unable to move on from the burden of guilt perhaps, or total melancholy? I don't know, but something was tethering him there. I mean, I don't see any other possibility, because if the electrical line was just severed, cut, there's no way that a light switch could come on unless someone brought in like a generator or one of those solar battery packs, but why would anyone do that? I don't think squatters would bring that along. And now time for the quote of the day. Nobody got anywhere in the world by simply being content. Louis L'Amour. You have to ask yourself where you want to get, because if you're happy where you are, you just have a normal job and you're happy, maybe you have a family and kids, and that's good for you, well great. Then, you've made it. You've won life, I would say. But if you have a longing for more, well, that longing isn't going to materialize unless you take action to materialize it. And so if you're simply content, you're okay, but you want more, you have to form a plan in your head to get there. And that's the first step. Just use your brain and think. And then you have to make choices and maybe take risks. But the first step is just think. What do I want? Am I actually happy here, not just content? And then if you aren't, form a plan to get what you really want after figuring out what it is. Maybe that's the hardest part. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.